All right, so endurance exercise training is going to increase mitochondrial mass. It's going to increase oxygen delivery by increasing blood capillaries that are going to there. We're increasing fatty acid oxidation enzymes. But what is the signal that moves from the exercise to all these biochemical changes that happen within the body? So the first thing we look at is what happens every time we contract a muscle. So we send an action potential from our brain or our spinal cord to the muscle. The first thing that happens within the muscle, calcium release. Calcium increases about 100-fold within the active muscle, and then it's going to come down. Force is going to be generated after the calcium because calcium is going to bind to troponin C. It's going to activate the myosin-actin interaction, and now you're going to get contraction. All right? So since contraction is increasing calcium release, one of the possible signals that could translate or transduce the endurance exercise to an increase in transcription or other changes within the muscle could be an activation of calcium-dependent signals. So if calcium is going to go up 100-fold during every contraction, what else could it do other than increase myosin-actin binding? How can it signal? So how could you transduce calcium into a signal that's going to result in adaptation? Well, there's a series of there's calcium signaling proteins that are within all of the cells within the body. And these are called the calcium calmodulin kinases, or calmodulin kinases, or CAM kinase. So there's a bunch of different varieties. This CAM kinase 1 is found throughout the body, and its activity is regulated by how much CAM kinase 1 you have in that tissue. So if you want to increase CAM kinase 1 activity, you need to increase its transcription, increase its translation, and then you're going to have more of the protein. So that's going to change rather slowly. There's CAM kinase 2, which is really high in muscle and brain. These are two areas where calcium is really important signaling molecule. In the brain, calcium helps us learn and remember, because calcium is going to help us make long-term, undergo the process of long-term potentiation, where we turn experiences into memories. Okay? And so CAM kinase 2 is high in these two tissues that are really sensitive to changes in calcium. So that's one thing that's important about it. It's an interesting molecule because it forms this oligomer, which is basically a bunch of things that come together to form one active unit. And what it is you need 6 of these proteins to come together to form the active CAM kinase 2. And once it forms, then its activity is determined, or it's regulated by its phosphorylation. So if you want to increase CAM kinase 2 activity, it's going to autophosphorylate, and that's going to show, and you can measure that as an increase in CAM kinase 2 activity. And then there's CAM kinase 4. It acts as a monomer, so it acts by itself, but it's only really expressed in the brain. It's not found in muscle. So really what we're looking at with endurance exercise is, do we regulate CAM kinase 2 activity? All right, so what does it look like? It looks like this beautiful donut. And you can see that each one of these subunits, each one of these, or maybe it's what is that cake with the hole in the middle? It's a bundt cake. And then if you take one slice of the bundt cake, that slice is one monomer of CAM kinase 2. This slice is another monomer of CAM kinase 2. That slice is the third monomer. So you can see that there's 6 of those monomers. They come together. And if you look at it, there's this beautiful active site right here, where this is where the protein can phosphorylate targets. And one of the first proteins that it phosphorylates is itself. And once it phosphorylates itself, it becomes more stably active. And that activity can then stay on for a longer period of time than just the presence of calcium. So calcium is necessary for the activation, but once it's activated, it's going to stay on a little bit longer than the muscle is active for. But if our muscle is active for 5 minutes, CAM kinase 2 is going to be active for 5, maybe 6 or 7 minutes. If we're exercising for 3 hours, it's going to be active for 3, maybe 3.5 hours as the calcium goes away and the CAM kinase slowly turns off. All right? So what happens during exercise? So this is 30 minutes of exercise, looking at CAM kinase 2 before, after, and then immediately after, you can see that you've got this nice increase in CAM kinase 2 activity. But then you can see that its activity is already starting to come down 30 minutes later. And that's because the calcium goes away. And yes, it's phosphorylated, so it's turning off a little bit, it's staying on a little bit longer than the calcium signal, but it's not staying on that long, because by 2 hours, you're already back down to baseline. So in order for you to have CAM kinase activity, you need to have, it's going to be on as long as there's contraction. And then once the contraction starts, it's going to very quickly come back to baseline levels. So if you go for a long period of time, you have a long activity of CAM kinase 2. If you go for a short period of time, you're only going to have that CAM kinase activity for a short period of time. All right, so this is CAM kinase seems to be regulating, or seems to be a measure of the duration of your exercise intent, or the duration of the exercise bout. What does CAM kinase do? So this is a really nice paper in Science where they overexpress CAM kinase in skeletal muscle. They used CAM kinase 4 because it wasn't already in skeletal muscle, and because it only has to be a monomer to act. But what you can see is when they overexpress CAM kinase 4, this little bit here is the mitochondria. These little balls here, these dark gray balls. And what you can see is this is the wild type animal. So you have nice mitochondria. You have some mitochondria in with the muscle fibers. But then after you overexpress CAM kinase 4, this amount of mitochondria becomes this amount of mitochondria. You have a huge increase in mitochondrial mass. So CAM kinase can drive an increase in mitochondria, can drive what we call mitochondrial biogenesis. All right, so really quickly to summarize, calcium is increased by 100-fold by every single muscle contraction. That means that if your muscle fiber is active, you're going to have high calcium signaling, and that high calcium signal is going to drive the activation of this calcium, calmodulin activated kinases. And these CAM kinases can maybe transduce the signal of exercise into a biochemical signal that's going to cause adaptation. In muscle, the primary CAM kinase is CAM kinase 2. It acts as an oligomer of oligohexamer. So 6 subunits have to come together to form the active subunit. But when it's active, when any CAM kinase is active in skeletal muscle, activation of CAM kinase is sufficient to increase mitochondrial mass.